Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeremy Dawson, the Policy and Program Specialist at NAS, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Introduction to NAUPA Standard File Format Reengineering Project. Hope everyone's doing well, and I want to thank you all out there for tuning in this afternoon. I'm just going to give a brief run through the webinar features that we have available. So in the handout section, you can download a copy of the slide deck used today, as well as the speaker bios. And also, we encourage you to interact with us today. So you can type your questions that you have into the box in the questions section at any time during the presentation. And our moderators will present these questions at the end of the formal presentation. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the webinar archive on the NAS site for future reference. We have the webinar scheduled for roughly an hour and a lot of great content to get through. So without further ado, on behalf of NAST and the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators, I would like to welcome and thank our speakers for presenting to the membership today and our attendees for joining us. And John, I will turn the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jeremy. Want to start off by thanking everyone for joining us. I think we had over 200 people register for this event, and it ranges from state unclaimed property staff to holders, consultants, and holder advocates. We have some third-party administrators for holders and even some UP software vendors. When we go through this slide today, wanted to touch base on what we're going to cover today. The NAUPA strategic plan included a need to revise the unclaimed property layout, and we are currently in the initial stage of doing so. The purpose of this webinar is twofold. First, we wanted to give everyone an update of where we're at and the progress we have made so far. But also, at the end of this webinar, we'll provide opportunity and how you can offer suggestions for us. So let me quickly kind of go over what we'll cover today. We're going to start off with a brief history of the NAUPA layout, where we've come from and where we're at. Go a little bit deeper on why a change is needed. And then we're going to talk a little bit in the details of the new format that we're moving to and what we've done so far. And then follow up with how we plan on implementing this new layout and then the next steps from there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Good afternoon. This is Ken Wagers with Kelmar Associates. I've been involved with the NAUPA standard for a very long time, and I'm happy to finally be working on our project and bring it up into current technologies and also add in current information around things that we haven't been tracking in the past. Just as a little bit of a history of where we came from. The original NAUPA standard focused only on codes, property types and owner types, and it was just telling people how to complete the paper-related forms and submit it to the state. Not long after that, in the early 1900s, how about 1990s, the first electronic reporting standard came up, allowing companies to report to states in electronic matters, meaning floppy disks back then, and some magnetic tape. Some of you may remember, if you're my age, the cartridges and the reels that were sent to states from time to time. Some states sent out hundreds of floppy disks every year to gather unclaimed property forms, and now we're finally moving a little bit further away from that, since probably none of us have a floppy disk on our computers anymore. The last major revision of the NAUPA standard, which we all refer to as the NAUPA 2, was released in 2003, still a pretty long time ago. Changes from the original standard, including fixing some missing fields, adding more information for securities, for stocks and bonds, and including things like delivery method and more enhanced information about how the securities are being transferred to the states, and also improving the amount of tangible information for those safe deposit boxes. We started talking about codes at the same time and seeing if we could get them consistent between states. And I know that's something that's always been a challenge for holders to report, but we weren't able to get all the states on board at that time. So we decided to leave the NAUPA 2 revision to be just format and didn't include any changes to the codes. However, a little bit later in 2010, we did change the list of recommended property type codes to include things like IRAs and other property. This was a recommended list. Not every state accepts every property type code. So unfortunately, we still have to go back to individual states to determine what are the right codes to use for things. States have modified their own version over the years. You know, for example, Texas and North Carolina and a couple of others have said, hey, we need some additional space for critical information, including things like mineral interest, which is primarily in Oklahoma and Texas. North Carolina wanted to make sure there was a space for a driver's license or other state ID, and including a date of birth. Since those weren't part of the format, they kind of tacked them on at the end and essentially changed that format so that if you send a North Carolina file to South Carolina, it wouldn't meet the standard. So shown on this slide is a quick example of what a NAUPA file looks like. And I'm sure there's a lot of you on the phone who have opened NAUPA files over the time, but it's a pretty good just kind of history lesson here. It's a fixed length file, and the record type is determined by the very first character on every line. So the first line on the screen is the holder information. And so this is, you know, my fake bank with maximum characters. And then the line 2 is the property record. And it actually contains owner information as well. So it's the property and the first owner. The line 3 is the secondary owner. And there could be multiple line 3s for each line 2. So if I happen to have a property that had 2 owners, I would see a type 2 record and 2 type 3s. The type 6 record is used for tangible properties. No, actually that's securities, I'm sorry. And then type 5 is for tangible properties. And 9 is the actual summary record, which things add up. You can see, you can look at this and say, oh, it's kind of readable. I can sort of see what's going on. But I have to know precisely where things start and finish within the format, which makes it hard to read for both the computers and the machines. And if we make a mistake or we put in a character that's unexpected, it can cause us problems. And as John talked about, one of the reasons that we want to change the NAUPA standard is it's one of NAUPA's goals. It's one of their organizational goals to say, hey, it is time for us to come into current technologies and revise this standard. The current NAUPA file is fixed width. It's very difficult for us to add additional data elements. What we really want to do is have a solution that allows us to leave the generalized format in place, but allow the adding of new data elements without having to go back to NAUPA and say, hey, let's start this process over again. And it'll take another 18 years before we get the release. So we want to make something that we can get done quickly. We are also interested in allowing states to put in their own validation so they can look at the standard and say, hey, if you are reporting to my state, I'm going to require this field to be validated in this certain way. But another state doesn't have to have the same validation. So Randy's going to talk more about this when we get there. But we're interested in something that while standard across all states, states can choose to implement some rules and definitions in a slightly different manner. The other main reasons are we are no longer getting the data that we need. If you look at the property and owner records within the current NAUPA structure, there is no place for an email address or for a phone number. And when's the last time you signed up for an account with a financial group that you weren't required to have both an email address and a phone? And then primarily that's how you keep in contact with those people. So we really must have that information. So because it becomes very important for identifying the properties to help the states do a better job of returning the accounts. The world has changed a lot. You know, people no longer get paper accounts as much. The cell phones, the emails, multiple calls, we all are after less physical mail in our mailboxes. We also have to look at other financial assets that are starting to become in the market, including things like Bitcoin. One of the big exchanges or wallets, Coinbase, was at the NAUPA conference this year, and they're prepared to start reporting unclaimed property to the states. But I don't know exactly how that's going to happen because there is no possible way in the NAUPA standard to report the kind of information that we might need for a Bitcoin or Coinbase account. We also have, because of the nature of the date of the format, we have unresolved data issues that come up all the time. I spend a fair amount of time with my clients resolving data issues inside these NAUPA formats. And if we get embedded characters or carriage returns or null values or high order accents, that can actually throw off the file itself and allows us to not actually properly load and validate the data without going in and correcting it. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is we want the data not to be changed by anyone, simply comes from the holder and get loaded directly without any touching. We need to do some things like increase track decimals. And when the NAUPA standard was set up, the securities were set to 4 decimals. But many DRP, especially related to securities, trade out to 6 decimals. So we need to be able to track to more decimals or more accuracy down for that information. Same for Bitcoin. You know, if you don't have 6 or 8 decimals of Bitcoin, you're just not going to get this right amount of value there. We also want to be able to report data as it's managed at the holder. So for example, the current NAUPA standard requires holders to parse that account information into name and address. So if the account was, you know, Ken G. Wagers, custodian for someone, you would be parsing that into last, first, middle, and then putting in the exchange code. This opportunity for the new standard would let us include the account exactly as it was tracked at the holding company. So in the new format, we're looking at new data elements, and we're looking at changing the layout structure. So we want to review what do we have today that is good. We want to identify those things that are new data elements, and then we want to say what kind of layout and structure would make more sense in today's world and that has proven in use. We don't want to invent something brand new. It just doesn't make sense to start from scratch. We want to look what other industries do and how they report and piggyback on all that knowledge and expertise. So some of the new data elements that we're looking for are, for the holder side, we're looking for DBA names, and we're looking for things like foreign tax identification numbers, which don't fit into the standard FEIN value fields. We want to capture information about how the holder is transmitting payment to the states, whether it be cash, whether it be tangible properties, or whether it be securities. We need to track some additional dates that determine when the as-of date of the report was, so that we can let states do a more accurate determination of dormancy. We want to make sure that we're capturing full addresses and we're not truncating based on what we happen to track in the format versus what the holder really has. We want to be able to track parent company information so that you'll know that where information is coming from, both of the parent and the subsidiary. Lots of reports are submitted by third-party agents. We'd like to be able to track that information so that the states can go back to the third-party agents and determine, you know, any accuracy or other related issues with the report. When the NAUPA file was last revised, HIPAA was not even a thing. And now we have to think about HIPAA is when we're posting property into the states, and the states then are turning around and putting that on their public websites. Are they following those HIPAA regulations that protect the patient's rights and the patient's data? And so we need an indicator that tell us that potentially this account may be subject to those regulations. We also have a number of states now that are doing shared agreements with other departments or other agencies within their states where they will co-list property. They may never get the property, but they'll list it on their website and help those other agencies identify where to go back and claim that property. So that gives us that non-remitted property indicator so that it helps us say, hey, the unclaimed property department isn't getting the money, but we'll help you find it anyway. On the property side, we already talked a little bit about this, but we'd love to have a full registration name and information. It's going to make proving the claimant much easier. The RPO date and last contact date. If that's a UGMA or UTMA account, when is the person expected to reach age of majority? When did the holder do their due diligence mailing? And if it's an IRA, what is that mandatory distribution date or other pension account? We do want to know that a 1099 has been issued to the owner. One of the last NAUPA webinars talked about 1099-Rs and reporting on IRAs, and it's going to require, under the IRS's new regulations and revenue rulings, that 1099 be issued before it's reported to the state. And we'd like to know that and be able to track that type of information within the NAUPA file. and then as we spoke, the non-remit indicator. Down at the owner level, we'd like to add alphanumeric information for postal codes. So right now we're limited to zip codes in there, and we'd like to be able to make sure we can track other foreign property or foreign owners. Tax ID type to indicate whether it's an SEIN, SSN, FEIN, or a foreign account. The driver's license number of the owner, their state, their email address, phone number, date of death if known, or the date of death indicator if the holder is aware that the person is deceased but does not have the actual date. And then in some cases, just a general description of the owner or information that the holder may have that is more generic but tied to a specific owner. For securities, there's a number of additional fields that would make some sense. Adding a symbol, allowing CUSIP, ISIN, and CDOL. The current CUSIP number field allows only the size of the CUSIP exactly, and ISINs and CDOLs are too large to actually fit within that field, meaning that if a holder is reporting those types of securities, we're not going to get accurate data. And we also, as discussed, we need to increase the decimals for the shares. And it would also want to know when the securities are paid through. This would tell us if the holder is submitting both cash and shares, how those dividends were paid through. So what is the date through which the dividends have been paid? For tangible property, it's good to know the branch information, like which bank did it actually come from. It's quite common for larger banks, especially, to aggregate their tangible property reporting information, but we'd sure like to know which branch that came from. Again, it helps dramatically during the claims process. In the mineral interest area, primarily Texas and Oklahoma are the ones that capture this data, though there are some states that have expressed interest in this as well. And Texas's mineral interest data is quite different than Oklahoma's data, so we need to make sure we allow for both of those. In the summary record, we'd like to know when this report was actually prepared so that we can tie that back to the context. So Randy, do you want to take it from here?
Yep. Okay, so I'm Randy Strady from Conduit, and I think John didn't mention, but the group that was working on this was split early on into two groups. One that really was focusing on the stuff that Ken just talked about, that says, what are the elements that the states really need to bring this data in and satisfy claims? And then another group was more on the technical side that says, what's the format going to be to deliver this? What's the format of the file, and how are we going to move it? And we might even later get into things like encryption and things like that. So first thing we tackled was the format. So we looked at XML and JSON, and the group agreed on XML. So we needed a solution that allows NAUPA to add new elements easily. But even within that, what if states had specific elements they wanted to add that maybe NAUPA as a whole didn't? So in the past, for example, Ken already mentioned this, that we had states that wanted to add things like deceased date, driver's license information, email. So one of the states did this by resurrecting a different record type in the fixed format. And some of the other ones, we just tagged it on the end of the property type 2 record, hoping that nobody else would ever use that data for something else in the future. So it really was not a good format for adding stuff to it or having state-specific variances. So we were looking for a solution that would accommodate that. There we go. Okay, so this is just an example of what we come up with. Again, this is a draft, and really just for demonstration purposes here, just to kind of quickly introduce those that aren't familiar with XML to XML and why it's a more flexible solution. There's some things in here that we are still working on also. But what you can see here is the way XML works is you have what's called a tag. So I got the little hand here that's pointing, and you have remitter, and then everything between there until the / remitter is remitter information. So you can group stuff like that into a hierarchy. We're looking at a format where the highest level is remittance, and that's essentially a file. And so here's the file. here is who's sending it. So in my example, that file may be coming from ABC CPA Incorporated. So a CPA may be doing this, and they may be doing it from more than one holder. And this could also be a third-party reporting company or audit company. It could be a parent company that's reporting for all their subsidiaries. So again, we have these pairs. So what this format allows us to do is, you'll see some things here that are missing, and that is we don't have sequence numbers like we had in the past, because we don't need those in this format. We don't have record types because they're kind of self-defining here. We've got, and that's what XML does, it defines itself here. So we've got a remitter and remittance record types essentially, and it's in this hierarchy. We don't even really need to have totals. In the old format, we had totals at the bottom, but we've agreed as a group we're going to go ahead and do that still, because the theory is that, let's say I had a remitter and I never got a close remitter tag because the file was transmitted and it didn't make it all the way there. The file would be invalid. It wouldn't pass validation records. However, we feel that totals are going to be good because it's possible that the file syntactically is correct, but maybe the program that generated it wasn't accurate, and it generated 10 properties totaling up to 10,000, but then they thought it was going to be 11,000. Okay, so we are still going to put totals probably at the bottom, some control totals. Okay, a couple other things that I can highlight here is we are looking at a way to indicate parent and subsidiaries. So in this example, what we're doing is we're defining a parent, and we're giving it just kind of a tag within here called parent1. So I live in the St. Louis area. So as an example, you guys may be familiar with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which is owned by Enterprise Holdings. So this is the parent. And so we define the parent, and then down here we have a holder, that's National Car Rental, which is owned by Enterprise Holding. And we know that because the parent, parent1, refers back up here to this parent record. Okay, so we have that relationship now, which was always very difficult before, and something that a lot of the states had been asking for, and a lot of the holders have been asking for a way to do kind of reporting at a consolidated level also. Okay. Also, the other thing is the old format was very structured. So, for example, it only allowed 2 contacts, and I think it was a reporting contact and a claim contact. This format would allow more than, however the state wants to do it, it could be any number of contacts. So you could have a corporate representative and a holding and a claim contact or whatever, just by doing an open tag here, contact information, and then a close on each one of those contacts within that report. Then down here we start our tag that says report, and everything here is related to that report. And again, this is not all inclusive, it's just an example that we put together. So we got the year, the report type, annual report, it's the first report of the year, and then within that we start getting into the properties, individual properties. So what was the account number, what was the NAUPA code, transaction date, all those kinds of things that are in the current standard. Then within that, we might have information. If it's a cash property, we would have information related to cash. If it's shares or stock, we might have a group here for the detail elements that would go into stock remittance. Okay. And then after you've defined the property and the value of it and all those kinds of things, we have owners. So we have one or more owners. So in my example here, I have an owner. It's John Smith. Then the next owner is Nancy Smith. And we continue on down with all of the owner information. And again, that could be 2, that could be 3, that could be however many you wanted, which the old standard did support a one-to-many owner relationship also, but we still do that. Okay. I don't know if somebody advanced that or I hit a button here, but I was, okay, so the next slide, the layout structure. Okay, there we are. Is the again we don't have sequence numbers, which I mentioned. We're going to do totals. So the implication when you look at this is you can see that the files are going to be much larger. This is a very verbose formatting because I don't just have a single file record that says here's the owner. I actually define each one of these and say this is the owner, this is the end of the owner, and here's all those elements in between. So you can see these files are going to be much larger. So if we had another, let's say we had another um, uh, situation like demutualization or something like that that was causing files with millions of records, the file size here could be an issue, and we may have to look at ways of breaking those up. Okay, so you're maybe thinking, well, that's great, but now how do we enforce some of these things that are required? Or, as I said, this is a format that may allow for state-specific things. Okay, so the answer to that is, my forward to backward is real slow here, sorry about that. Jeremy, I don't know if you can help me move forward here. There we go. Okay, so we're going to use something called an XSD, XML schema definition. This can be used to apply definitions or validations to the file, things like alpha and numeric. So if you have an owner type and that owner type is alpha, we can enforce that, where we can enforce that dollar amounts have to be dollars or amounts, not alpha. So we have the ability to do that. We can enforce which fields are required. We can even do ranges. So we can say owner types have to be between 1 and 10, etc. So we have other things that we can do, and I'll show you some examples. So the theory here is that each state can have their own XSD to enforce their own required fields and rules. And that's, I think, the approach that we're going to take is that while NAUPA will publish a standard format, each state will have an XSD that you can download from their website and do validations on the file if you're a holder, they can do the validations on the file right at their own site and know if they have some problems. Now, some things that an XSD can't do is there's going to be some things that, like let's say, for example, we're still working on how we want to deal with the foreign tax IDs. Do we want to have 2 fields or we want to have 1 field? If we do 1 field, then we can't validate using US tax ID information. So those are kinds of things that we're still working on. But either way, there's going to be some things that XSD can't enforce. And at that point, the creating program and the receiving programs will have to do some validation outside of an XSD. But the XSD is going to help with a lot of it. You know, one of my colleagues even mentioned that the nice thing about an XSD is this could be given to the software vendors that create these files to basically supplement or somewhat replace that annual questionnaire where they say, what are all your valid codes and what are the fields that you require? This will basically replace that, or for the most part, replace it. Okay, so let me just show you an example of some things that an XSD can do. And I've highlighted some things here. Okay, so the first one, min occurs equals 1. So that says I, in this file, must have and designate at least 1 remitter. I need to know who sent this file. Okay, remitter name. I've got a definition here, XS:*string, that says this is a string. Holder parent, max occurs equals unbounded. That's saying that a parent is optional. So if we just have a small ma and pa grocery store and they don't really have a parent company, it is not, in this example, a required field. Okay. I also have the ability, or we have the ability to validate date. So incorporated date here would become a date format, and if it was not formatted properly, then it would fail the validation. Down here at the bottom, we have the ability, if you have a list of things like contact type. So let's say we have R for reporting and C for claim, we can validate that what they provided is in that list. So they can't just make up new contact types. Okay. So like I said, we have some challenges still. Things like a zip code. You know, do we create two fields that says U.S. zip code and foreign zip code, and that way we're able to validate the U.S. zip code, or do we use one field and we will then it kind of breaks our ability to do some validation on it. So those are some technical challenges that we're still working through. And again, like I said, this is a draft, so don't take this and start working and programming on it. So that's about it. So we can turn it back to John.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Ken. Now everyone should have at least a good idea of what we're trying to accomplish and the direction we are heading. Before I jump into what our next steps are, I want to take a second because one of the common questions is how will we implement this, you know, once we're finished. So the first step will be, once we get a completed layout, is NAUPA will have to approve the new format. Once it goes through the NAUPA Executive Committee and we have formally approved whatever that ending new format looks like, which our goal right now is try to get that accomplished by the end of this calendar year. Then it will be individual state-by-state choice on timing. Each state will decide when they'll start accepting the new format. My guess is we will obviously, even after the format's been approved by NAUPA, we got to give enough time for the software vendors for the states and the software vendors for the holders enough time to design and implement these changes. Once each individual state decides they are now willing to accept the new format, my guess will be most states will have an overlap where they will allow both the new format and probably the existing current format at the same time. And then each state will decide on their own at what point in time they will cut off the old format and only accept the new one. So I expect it'll give holders plenty of time to adjust, plenty of time for software vendors to program and create before accepting and then eliminating the existing one. So next steps, what are we where we go from here? Currently, we're right now at the first bullet point. We're sharing what we have with all our key stakeholders. We're going to be requesting feedback. We want to make sure we're going on the right path and not missing anything. We feel like we're heading in a good direction. In the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that feedback and how you could do that if you're interested. Once we feel like we've captured all the information we have based on where we're currently at, we still need to finalize all the data elements that we need to be included and finalize the XML structure that we just talked about. What's so nice about this is anytime we know things change, we can adjust, as they talked about earlier, with adding data elements with our new structure as it is. In addition to just the NAUPA layout with the data elements and the structure, we're also going to go back and look at any existing codes we still have, validate and verify, hey, do we need to make any adjustments to, property codes? We recently already did relationship codes, but anything else. So we are going to do this as a big picture and encompass all of it and look at that also. Once all that's done, then we'll be able to create that schema that Randy talked about that we can share with the stakeholders so they can also use not only to create the new file layout, but to validate it on themselves. We'll always, continue any adjustments and feedback as we go through this process. and like I said, then send it to the NAUPA Executive Committee for implementation. All right, so the purpose, like I said, of this was to share where we're at. Hopefully you got a better idea of the direction we're heading. If you have any suggestions and the things that I'm looking for, with like the data elements, we obviously have pretty much all the standard name, address, that kind of stuff. But if there's something unique to your industry you're in, or a problem you've currently been experiencing, and you want to make sure that we capture those different data elements, or even in the structure, if there's anything that you've had an issue in the past with that you want to make sure we've thought about, we encourage your suggestions through email at naupa@statetreasures.org. Right here. Send that to us. We will look at all the suggestions sent to us. Not going to make any promises on how we implement anything, but we want to be open and we want to hear what you have to say. So send that to naupa@statetreasures.org. And myself, I am the chair. Alan Mark from North Carolina is the vice chair, and then all the members will distribute it to. We'll take a look at that and go from there. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy and David for any questions we might have.
Yes, this is David Milby. I'm the director of NAUPA, and I've been given the job for questions today, and we do have some good questions that have come in, and some are being typed as we speak. This goes back to quite a bit earlier in the webinar for the panelists. What about YAML?
This is Ken Wagers. I'll answer that one, David, and then if it's okay with everybody, I'll answer the second question as well. So the first question was, what about YAML, Y-A-M-L, which stands for yet another markup language, and it's a simpler version of XML, or a simpler version of a markup language than XML. And at the same time, I'm going to answer this second question. The second question is, XML has become outdated over the last decade, and JSON has become the industry standard for data exchange. Given that JSON is faster, more lightweight, and easier to work with than XML, could you tell us the reasoning for the group choosing XML over JSON? So the primary reason that we chose XML over JSON or over YAML is because of the ability to use the XSD to validate the data. And we think that's really important, that the states will be able to provide their own XSD, and holders or software companies can use that published XSD, that schema verification, to validate that the files meet the state standard. Those things are, as far as I'm aware, harder to do with JSON and harder to do with YAML. So that was really the primary driver for the choice of XML over the other two or other different formats.
And this is Randy. I can take the next two if you want, David.
Yeah, we will need to, of course. Do you want me to read the question first?
I can go ahead and read it. The question was, what links the owner to the property?
Actually,
ahead,
we have one. We have one right after. Well, we didn't really read the question, but I assume everybody inferred from Ken's description. So I apologize. I got off track there. Yeah, go ahead, Randy. What links the owner to the property?
Yeah, what links the owner to the property? And so in my example, there is a property opening tag, so it just says property. That property is going to continue until you come to a /property close tag. So any owner elements in between there belong to that property. So it's a hierarchy. And in my example, I kind of indented, even though that's not required, it kind of make it more visual. But basically, everything from property through /property belongs to that property, including all those owners.
Just showing an example there for you.
Yeah, and I don't know if you go down, maybe I didn't show the closing tag on the property. Oh, I did. So you see there's owner, and then down at the very bottom you see a /property, and that says I'm done with that property, and then I can move on to the next property. In this case, I'm also done with the report. Okay. The next question, David, I think you might need to answer it first from a NAUPA perspective, and then I will be glad to answer it from our particular product perspective if I'm allowed to.
Well, is that concerning? Will there be an option of an engine to create the new format for companies that don't have a way to create this new format?
Yes.
I will go ahead and take that for you, David.
Yeah, go ahead.
So currently, there's several software vendors out there that create the current NAUPA format. We expect, and we've been in contact with all of those, let them know we're making these changes, and plan on working with them to adjust and be able to make a product that creates this new format also. Currently, NAUPA does not have their own product and don't expect at this point in time will have their own engine or product. But like I said, our current software vendors are already currently making some. And Randy, you can kind of talk a little bit more detail about what y'all doing and same thing.
Right, and I was just going to say there is no NAUPA endorsed one anymore. We still offer a free version of HRS Pro within certain parameters, and that would still exist and help holders format the file in the format that we're seeing here. And likewise, I would imagine all the other third-party vendors that have software would be able to do that also.
Yep, and that's true. And from the Calmar side, our state clients have the ability to do some minor data entry without requiring a software package. So it's really not designed for large reports.
And this is David, and Randy's right. Randy was referring to a time when we exclusively endorsed one vendor, and we do not currently do that. But we do put the HRS Pro product because that company is a corporate affiliate member of NAUPA. So that's the reason that they are being recommended. Can you share a complete list? And this is from a software vendor, and certainly that vendor can reach out to me, reach out to John. But can you share a list of what you are currently adding, changing? When will more details be available to people like software vendors?
Yeah, I'll take that. And we are, have a list that we've been working through. We are currently working on putting it in a cleaner, more format for you to see those. But if you are one of those software vendors, and you please reach out to us. I gave you the email earlier, and we'll definitely get back in touch with you and help you with that.
What feedback do we have so far from holders or others who know about this file layout update? I will say that someone went to a securities industry association meeting, and it was an administrator, said they got extremely positive feedback from those who were knowledgeable about what we've been doing. But John, you want to take that one too? Yeah,
like I said, what feedback so far I've got has been very positive. Everyone pretty much realizes the limitation of our current format, and it is old, and we all need, additional information. Holders want to provide more information and have a need, a requirement to. States have a need and want to, collect more of it and do it in a better method. So everybody, I believe, is on the same page of the need, and so we've had great, response so far. And the purpose, again, of this, because NAUPA wants to show that we want to work with the holder communities and include them while we're going through this process. So.
I think let's see. We do have an interesting one here. Will there be a universal Excel spreadsheet for property upload?
Again, I'll take this one. It goes back to the same answer I had earlier. The different software vendors that currently create the ability to create the NAUPA layout. Some of them have some sort of Excel upload, some don't. So again, that will be a case by case on what they are willing and want to do. As far as I would expect, that wouldn't change. What's changing is the layout that is being put in. But again, that's not NAUPA's control. Those will be the different software vendors that do that.
What if you do not have all of the data points? Driver's license number, etc. I don't know exactly. Does that mean if we don't include them in the new?
Yeah, this is Ken. And one of the nice things about XML is you simply don't have to use the tag. So if it's not there, you don't have the data, you can either put the beginning tag and an ending tag there with nothing in the middle, or you can leave the tag out. If you leave the tag out and it's required as part of the XSD, then your file will fail, though.
If you look at the example that's currently on the screen and you go down to like country or tax ID, there's nothing there, and that is an example of they've chosen to omit it.
I think we've covered this. There was a question a little while back, will there be a transition where states can accept both NAUPA 2 and NAUPA 3? That is a little bit different. So it sounded, well, I'll let all three of you jump in there, but is there a transition where you can accept both NAUPA 2 and NAUPA 3? Or is it going to, at some point, be a clean switch? Okay, NAUPA 2 turn off, NAUPA 3 turn on.
So when I go back to what I talked about on the implementation, after NAUPA approves whatever this new format is, that will be a state-by-state choice. Each state will make that decision when they turn one on and turn the other one off. I do expect, talking to most states, is there will be an overlap where most states will allow both for a short period of time to allow holders to make that switch and adjust to it. But how long of time and when they make those decisions, again, it'll be a state-by-state choice.
I don't. Let's try this one out. Would we have to? This is coming from I think a state member. Would we have to share XSE with other states for reciprocal reports?
Well, that is an awesome question. Probably not. I think for reciprocal reports, you're going to create as close to generic and NAUPA standard as you can. Now, you could, so if Colorado is reporting to Missouri, or Missouri is reporting to Colorado, you could pull the XSD from that state and use it to validate your file on the way out, or the state could use their own XSD to validate those reciprocal reports as they come in. Most states, though, do have some translation ability already, so if they have a property type code that they don't use that other states do, they often translate that on the way in. So I think in general, it's not a huge deal for XSTs between states when they exchange property.
Questions are coming in pretty fast, and to the panelists, I have stopped pasting them. I'll just continue here. Some states require NAUPA reports to be encrypted. Any plans to change this or share a more automation-friendly encryption mechanism? Using NAUPA encryption utility is not practical to vendors.
It's unknown. Do you want me to go ahead and take it? You can take it and I'll follow up, Randy, too.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
Yeah, I think that that's something that NAUPA, we still need to consider, and part of the technical group, about the format and delivery methods, including encryption. And whether it's even required if it's sent over a secure link or those kinds of things. So those are things that we're still considering and haven't gotten that far yet. But it's certainly something that should be a NAUPA standard at some point, and whatever it is.
Yep. And I would say that I think what our general discussions have been in the meeting so far is that we're really interested in doing a industry standard type encryption where NAUPA is not responsible for maintaining keys or that type of thing. So it is actually plenty secure to use your browser's encryption using TLS. And as long as the sites that you're submitting your unclaimed property through contain that level of encryption, the good news is you don't have to maintain any keys. The data is typically secured at rest once it's uploaded. So encryption may not be the big issue it was 10 years ago.
The only thing I will add is, us changing this new format is going to give us better flexibility and ability for encryption. We are looking at NAUPA trying to do something standard, but again, my standard answer is that some of that will be state by state. If a certain state wants to mandate something, they always will have that ability. But we think we'll have a better product that will allow for a better opportunity for a uniform encryption.
Well, now, not only will software vendors need to make changes, but holders will need to make changes to files they are receiving from their source systems. So have we taken that into consideration?
I'll start off with that. So part of that implementation phase is, once we've finalized what this is to give holders and the software vendor for holders and the software vendors for states plenty of time to make those adjustments and what that should be. So yes, we have given that some thought, which is why I also expect a transition of allowing both until that can be done.
Now, will this new layout structure be easier for a holder that wants to create their own NAUPA file? I get this question fairly often. People, there must be some talented people out there, obviously, that create their own NAUPA file. So is it going to be easy for them to do this without using a vendor product? You think maybe there'll be less likelihood of mistakes and so forth for these people that want to create their own NAUPA file?
I'll start there, and then the technical people want to add anything. Because we're going to an XML, which is widely known, leaving, a fixed width, structure, I would expect, and part of the reason we like this was there's plenty of holders that have programmers that want to program their own that are familiar with XML that should be able to easily, make that shift. So, Randy or Ken, if you want to add anything to it, but I think that actually should be helpful.
And I was going to say the same thing, that it is a standard that most programmers are familiar with. So, yes, it is going to require programming changes for those people that are making their own NAUPA files, but it is XML, which is a standard. And in fact, I think that was one of the criteria against JSON, as it was not as widely known.
Now, will the XML, I don't understand this, but I bet you guys will. Will the XML still collect the software that created the XML?
Yes. There will still be fields that say, this is the software company or software system that created it. That's actually an important indicator, because we often, if there's issues with a format, and we can look at it and say, oh, it's, Ken made the error in his software, and then we can go back to Ken and say, hey, you're not writing the XML correctly. And it had nothing to do with the holder. The holder was doing it fine, but it was Ken's software that wasn't right. So yes, we'll continue to manage that information.
I've had a couple of these, John. Would you please repeat the timing of the rollout?
Definitely. So our goal is, by the end of this calendar year, to finalize this layout and data elements. That will require us to continue looking at the different data elements, make sure we're not missing anything. That's why we're asking for feedback. Once we finalize the different data elements and the layout structure that we presented to you, NAUPA will have to formally approve of it. And again, our goal is at the end of the calendar year. After that is done, that's when each state will have their opportunity to decide at what point in time they will start accepting the new layout. Again, I expect an overlap between the NAUPA 2 and NAUPA 3, where most states will accept both for some period of time, and then each state will individually decide when they will cut off accepting NAUPA 2, and everything must be NAUPA 3.
And John, while I've still got the floor, would you mind going over the address one more time? Well, I can, if you of people who would like to provide format based on today's webinar, and showing everyone, where NAUPA is with this project. And John's got it up there. So NAUPA at statetreasurers.org. I always say that it's very easy to mistype the treasurers. So make sure you got all the R's and the E's and so forth, and it's plural. So NAUPA at statetreasurers.org, and we will we will shoot those emails right to John Gabriel and the committee that he chairs and all the great people that are working. We do not have any more questions, and we are running upon an hour. And do we have any final comments from John, Ken, and Randy?
Yeah, I'll make one final comment. I think I've seen a part of it embedded in the question of how to keep up with progress that we're making from here. We plan on continually, sharing information as we go along in certain milestones, whether it's another webinar, whether it's mailings individual states will do, whether it's posting stuff to the NAUPA website. We will reach out and make sure to kind of keep holders and other interested parties up to speed as far as where we're at in that progress.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. I'd like to recognize you again from NASS to close the webinar.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, John, Ken, and Randy, for speaking, for leading the discussion on this important topic. It was really interesting and informative, and all of us here at NASS and NAUPA just greatly appreciate the time and effort it took to prepare and meet with us. And to everyone out there, thank you all for participating, and I hope everyone has a good evening.
All right, thank you.